In this screencast, I'm going to try to create a 3D type of device or device graphic to show something like a hard drive or some other device, and hopefully illustrate some concepts in Inkscape about using guides and gradients, things like that. So we'll give it a shot here, see how it goes. First, what I'm going to do is make sure in my document properties under the snap tab that I'm going to snap to object nodes and snap points to guides. Those are the two key ones. Snapping just means the cursor will, once I create some guides, when I create points for a path, they'll snap directly to the guides, and that makes things a lot easier to get lined up. So what I'll do first is drag a couple guides out. What I'm going to do is try and center everything around the 0 line to make things a bit easier. And what I do normally is double click the guide, and that gives me a way to set it exactly. So I'm going to set this one right at 0. I'm going to drag out a few guides here, and I'm going to set them up shortly. I'll explain a bit later. You'll see why I'm drawing them the way I am. This takes a little bit of setup time, but it pays off big time in the end. So that's the 0 grid. This outside one we can set to some round number that's close to this, something like, say, 260. We'll set this one to nice 240, and this one to 220. That worked out well. So this one will be minus 220, minus 240, minus 260. Okay, and I need some horizontal guides, one for the back of the box, one for the front of the box, and one for the bottom front of the box. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit and start drawing my shapes. The first shape I'm going to draw is the top of the box, so I will click there, and create just a polygon here. And you can see when I click those nodes, they grab onto the guide intersections as well, so you don't have to worry so much about getting things exactly right if the snaps are set correctly. Second shape, like that. Another tip, got all these guides here, it's kind of hard to see your lines. If you hit the pipe key on your keyboard, on mine it's just above the / key. So I hit shift and that key and I get the pipe key, which turns all the guides off and on. Even when they're off, the guides work, so you'll find things grabbing to certain things that are invisible. Those are still there, those guides. It's just nice to get rid of them once in a while to see what you're doing. What I will do is then select the top piece and bring up the fill and stroke dialog box. I will, turn off the stroke. I will turn to the fill, set a kind of medium gray, then go to gradient, and I'm going to edit this gradient to go from this medium gray at this stop to kind of a very light gray. Make sure that it's fully opaque, and that's the gradient I'm going to set. I'm going to hit this tool and then adjust these so the dark edge is at the back, hold control to get this vertical, and bring the lighter edge up to the front. Now I'll take my second object, again turn off the stroke, change to the fill tab, I'll click a gradient, and what I'll do is I'll use the gradient I just created, okay, this 3155. Only what I'm going to make sure I do is duplicate it. It gives me a new gradient name. If I use the same gradient and then I go and make some change to it, it will affect the original one too, which can really screw things up. I've done it many times and just pull my hair out when it happens. So always try to remember to duplicate that gradient so you're working with an object with its own gradient, unless of course you want things to share gradients. That's up to you. again, hit this gradient tool. I'm going to make the dark area down at the bottom. Hold Control and bring the light area up at the top. Okay, and you can probably drag this a little bit further so you get some definition between the two sides. So there, we've already got kind of a simple box in kind of top 45-degree view. What I will do is then duplicate this shape over here. I'm going to create some highlights. So what I'm going to do is hold Control and drag that node over. Hold Control, drag that node over. Now you see it's very subtle here. I'm going to try and keep these two a little bit closer together than the front two, because that part of it is closer to our viewpoint, so it looks a little nicer. It's those little things that make the big difference a lot of times, I notice. So I'll change to a solid fill for now, make it very, very light gray, and actually what I want to have in the end is a gradient of this, so we can even do a white. Hit a gradient, the gradient tool, and this is where it becomes a little tricky to eye this up. You want that to go from a solid white to a transparent white all the way along. Drag that Control, with the Control key I drag that over, and see how the guide lined it up nicely to the edge of that shape, because the guides are still there. If I hit the pipe key, you'll see they're still there. Take that one highlight shape, duplicate it, and hit the mirror button. Oh, grab the wrong thing. Drag that one over to the other side. Okay, and there's kind of the top two corners. You'll see what I'll do with those in a minute. Now what I'm going to do is go closer to this corner, and I've got three shapes. I've got the top, I've got the front, and I've got the highlight shape. What I want to do is create a kind of 45-degree corner here. I want to start where, if I double click it, you'll see there's a node here, that end of the highlight shape. I want a 45 or some kind of angle down across here. What I'll do to make things work out a little better is I'll put a guide down there so I can remember where I'm going to, and bring a horizontal guide over close to this node. It doesn't have to be exact. So what I'll do is bring the guide over close to that. Now, what I will do is take the front shape and add a node somewhere close to that point by double-clicking on it when it's selected as a path. And this is where the snapping becomes a bit of a pain. We should have actually one more grid here, because that's where I wanted the node to end up. It's there. Then I select my top shape, and again add a node. Sorry. Move that node over there. Drag that node down, and then take my highlight shape and just drag that node down. Okay. Now if I hide the things, you can see the effect I'm getting here. It's kind of a chamfered corner. Alright, now if I turn the guides on again, I can still have the horizontal one. I'm going to have to kind of, for the sake of time, recreate the other guides that I needed, which were these two. Again, highlight the front shape, create a new node, then bring that one down to there, highlight the top shape, create a new node, drag it down to that same point, and then take the highlight shape and drag that node down. Again, got my chamfered corner, two of the same, and I will now do a little bit of work on the front face of this. What I'm going to do is duplicate this shape, double click it because it's a path, hit Control J, or all I'm doing is a path dynamic offset, Control J. Grab that one remaining node and drag it in slightly. I will hit F1 to select it. Probably, just for now, we'll make it a darker color, and then we're going to turn that into a gradient. We will put the darker edge up here, the lighter edge at the bottom, and what I'm going to do actually is change that gradient slightly. I'm going to edit the gradient because now it's black to transparent, or very dark gray to transparent. I'm going to change that endpoint to be a very, very light gray, almost a white, and make it opaque. So I want it to be light at the bottom. You'll see why in a second. So it kind of looks like almost a hollow box now. And I will again take that shape, duplicate it. I have to turn it into a path using Object to Path. And now I can double click it, hit Control J for the offset. I'm going to offset another shape slightly inside of that one. Hit F1 if you want to see it clearly. Give it some other color, say a medium gray. And you can see I've made kind of a face. Now what I'd like to do is actually make that a gradient. I'll pick one of the ones I used before. Again, once I pick it, I'm going to duplicate it so that I don't screw up what I've already done. And I'm going to change the grip points to be probably, I think, dark on the bottom, light on the top. Kind of give the effect I want. So there, I've got kind of my front thing. We'll do a little bit of just a little accent here. Probably actually should, yeah, we'll just do a little bit of a quick and dirty kind of feature. We'll do is a rounded rectangle like this. Probably make it a bit smaller and a bit longer. Now, again, I'm going to put a gradient on this thing. So we'll bring up the Fill and Stroke dialog box for this object. I will make it black, then hit the gradient button, edit the gradient, and change the other stop to a nice light gray or almost a white, and fully opaque, and hit the tool. And again, see, in this case, everything I'm drawing is kind of drawn with the light coming from the top. So you always shade, if things are kind of convex into the object, I want the top dark and the bottom light. And you'll see, if I bring it up in here, you'll see what I'm going for is kind of a indent or a hole in the front of that thing. Okay, so I will then duplicate this a couple of times. I'll select them all, bring up the alignment dialog box, and I will distribute them equally to get it looking decent. I can group them, so I can just drag them around as one object. And cheat a little bit here, and I'm just going to cant them a little bit, not too much, just with that stretching skew tool. And there, I've got kind of a nice drive box with a kind of little grillage on the front. You can dress it up with some buttons. And now for things to look a little bit nicer, I'm going to group that. I'm going to duplicate it over here. And what I'll do is I'll ungroup it again and choose Path Union. If these are all paths, I still got a grouped object in here. Now I can take all these, Path Union, becomes one solid block. I will make that black, not gray. I'll explain why in a minute. I will add some blur to it and drag it over top of my object, hit page down. Sorry, I'm hitting this page down on the blur, and put it below, and actually I'll move it a little bit down like this, and you can see what I've got is kind of a shadow under that. So now you can put that on a web page or do whatever you want with it. The reason I say the shadow should be black, if it's too dark and you want to lighten up the shadow, make it black and change the opacity of it. If you make it gray, when you put it onto a different background color of a web page or something, that gray will look really funny. It works much better if you use black and then reduce the opacity. So there you go. Hopefully you can use that to draw some other objects, those concepts, and maybe do some graphics of this type for yourself. Thank you very much for watching.